Coming up on the St. Paul Forum, I'm talking with Kristin Makholm of the Minnesota Museum of American Art. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm Catherine Day, and joining me today is Kristin Makholm of the Minnesota Museum of American Art. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy you could join us today. So you've not been in the Twin Cities your whole life, and you've come to this new project. Give us a little background on where you came from.
Sure. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I came here to the Twin Cities to go to graduate school in art history. My background is as an art historian. And I'm very interested in the whole art part of museums and the history of art. And so I was a curator at a few other museums. I went to the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I was a curator there for several years. But I came back here because I think that the Twin Cities is an incredibly rich cultural center. I love the Twin Cities. It became my home. I've adopted it as my home. And so my museum background has really come to help me in this new enterprise.
Great. And you know, the Minnesota Museum of American Art has been traditionally located in St. Paul, but it has a little bit of a coming and going history. I mean, it has a great historical roots, but recently it's been out of the public eye, but you've been bringing it back to our attention. So can you give us a little snapshot of where was the Minnesota Museum of American Art? And
Sure.
Then we'll talk about today.
Sure. Well, it's a St. Paul's Art Museum. It is the only art museum in St. Paul, and its roots go far back to the 19th century as the St. Paul Gallery and School of Art. That's how it got to be known in the, way back in the beginning of the 20th century.
And where was it located when it was that school?
It was in a mansion on Summit Avenue.
Okay.
And so it really, the collection that started to be formed and the great exhibition programs and the teaching institution was under that name, St. Paul Gallery and School of Art. And you may know one of its great teachers was Warren Mackenzie, who came here to teach, came to the Twin Cities.
And when was that? That was
in the late 1940s.
In the 40s, okay.
Yes.
And Warren Mackenzie is known for his great sculptural work. Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, he's a potter.
He's a potter.
He's a ceramic artist, and he's one of the great artists of this region. And he and his wife at the time came here to teach at this school, which was St. Paul's Art School. And so that is where the collection began, and that's where the history, really strong history of this organization really began to thrive, was in the 40s and 50s and 60s. In the 60s, it became the St. Paul Arts Center, and it moved into the Arts and Sciences Complex, which is now where McNally Smith School of Music is.
Okay.
And it was there, connected with the Science Museum in its earlier days.
So there was a connection between art and science in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes,
because we've lost a little of that connection, except as we start to think about it related to innovation. So
Absolutely.
we'll see if that's part of the thread of what's coming next. But.
The connection was very strong at that point, but we were also looking to expand our space. And so beginning in the early 70s, we were in a lovely Art Deco building in downtown St. Paul called the Gemini Building. It was originally the Women's City Club building.
Oh, I wondered what it was originally. Yeah, it was a gorgeous place, had great food, and was truly extraordinary. And what's in there now?
Well, it's an architecture firm.
Okay.
Currently, we did own that building, and that was really the hub and the home of the Minnesota Museum of Art. It became then in the late 60s, the Minnesota Museum of Art, for a good 20 years. At the same time, we became involved in the renovation of Landmark Center in the late 1970s and moved into the second floor and the fifth floor spaces of that building in the early 1980s.
Okay.
And so the museum had several different places that it was operating out of at a particular time.
A little bit of a nomadic story.
Exactly, but we had a wonderful school which took over the fifth floor of Landmark Center. Great exhibition programs, and as you said, a wonderful restaurant that was in the Gemini building. And this continued for many, many years until the museum in the early 1990s decided to become a museum of Minnesota, of American art.
So that was just in the 90s, and originally the collection had other dimensions to it.
Oh, it was a global collection. It had things, it had Korean ceramics, and it had German expressionist prints and Japanese prints, and works from the South Pacific and Africa and all over Europe. It was a very wide-ranging collection. And the administration in the 90s decided to really focus that back down on American art. And so the collection was focused on American art primarily. And that was the time that the museum moved from the Landmark Center. We had left the Gemini building several years earlier and left the Landmark Center in the early 2000s to go to the West Publishing Company building, part of the Ramsey County Government Center on Kellogg Boulevard. And that was the last permanent home of the museum up until 2009. So it has been an interesting history for this organization, and yet it is St. Paul's one and only art museum, and it's got a great legacy and tradition in this city.
So the museum, in a sense, contracted as it you know, if we think about the period of time, lots of things are contracting. 2008, 2009, things kind of hit the road. You know, the rubber hits the road, and something that maybe isn't seen as essential at that point in time goes away. But you took on this challenge, and I've had the sense all along that there's some adventure that you see and real passion for why you think this is so important to our city and our community. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what made you intrigued by this particular project at this time, with the challenges that it might have before it.
Absolutely. Well, prior to taking this position, I was the gallery director at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And so I was working with a lot of contemporary artists, emerging artists. I got to know the cultural community here very well. And yet I missed working with a collection. And I knew that the Minnesota Museum of American Art had a very fine collection. It has over 4,000 works of art, and in some strong depth in many areas, including art of this region. But to my feeling, it needed to be seen more. It needed to have a home. People wanted to see it, and it was an incredible strength that wasn't really receiving its due. And so when I saw this opportunity, I thought, here's a great way for us to bring this collection back into view. It's a cultural and civic treasure that should be viewed, that St. Paul people and citizens and people to St. Paul can really value as something that is a strength of this region. And it should be seen. So I just felt it was a great opportunity. And sometimes you need to start fresh. And this organization has been through lots of ups and downs during the over 100 years history that it's had. And it needed a little bit of a fresh start, and it's an exciting time to start an organization like this fresh, because museums are changing. The idea of what a museum is for its community is opening up and expanding and becoming much more inclusive and accessible. And it just, the fresh spirit of that is something that I thought was a great opportunity for this organization to grow and thrive in a new century.
So one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute is that you're looking at a new location in downtown. But before we go there, I'd like to just talk a little bit about, as you were bringing the collection back out, you programmed a lot of events. You had a lot of different collaborations and partnerships. You teamed up with some other people. You looked at other spaces. So tell us a little bit about what your thinking was about that. What were some of the highlights of that experience?
Sure. Well, as I said, the collection seemed to me this enormous asset that wasn't being seen and recognized as it should. And while we didn't have a home when I came on, I felt, well, we have a great collection. Let's get the collection out. The spirit of partnerships and collaborations is strengthening now in our cultural communities. And it seemed like a great time to let's take the collection and allow it to be seen in other places, and at the same time build some strong partnerships that can carry us into the future. And so I started I was the only employee of the museum at the time, but my curatorial background was handy, and I was able to organize exhibitions and show them in a variety of places: the Minnetonka Center for the Arts, the College of Liberal Arts in St. Paul, St. Paul Academy, the Minnesota State Fair last year. We did an exhibition of parts of the collection at the Minnesota State Fair. Over 3,000 people came in to see that. I mean, excuse me,
what building was
over
that?
30,000 people came in to see that.
What building was that
It was in the J.V. Bailey House, which many people might recognize as the yellow clapboard house that used to have the superintendent. They are, the St. Paul State Fair Foundation is doing some smaller but choice exhibitions in that space and bringing people into it. So we were able to create a partnership there. And so the excitement of working with new organizations that may not have been on our radar prior to this is I thought, okay, we'll get the collection out, people can see the art, we'll build partnerships at the same time, and legacy money through the state of Minnesota has been enormously important for us. There's one large exhibition that has been traveling around the state this past year called Our Treasures, highlights from the Minnesota Museum of American Art.
So it's been around the state.
Absolutely. It was in Duluth and in St. Peter and in Northfield, and it opens in Fargo-Moorhead next month.
Oh, in the Plains Museum? Or?
Exactly.
Okay, fabulous space.
And this was an opportunity to get out what I considered were 30 or so of the greatest works in the collection to show the immense depth and range of what this collection can offer. And it was legacy money through the state of Minnesota that helped support this tour, and a catalog that we were able to publish and bring in scholars of all sorts, and including students from some of the universities to which this exhibition was going, and curators, and all variety manner of scholars helped to write the entries for this catalog. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm proud that we can really focus on a great collection that has many, many stories to tell, and start to tell those stories.
Great. If you're just joining us, I'm talking with Kristin Makholm of the Minnesota Museum of American Art. So let's talk a little bit about what's, as you've been in this discovery process going around the state, what's brought you into downtown St. Paul, and what is it you're looking for here? You've got an announcement that you've just made. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, well, we just did announce that we are opening a gallery in the Pioneer Building, the Pioneer Endicott Project, which is one of the great old building complexes in St. Paul that still has been vacant for several years and is now undergoing redevelopment.
And what location is that?
It is on the corner of 4th and Robert Street.
Okay.
Many of your viewers might know it as a place with these beautiful arcades, glass-covered arcades, and a 16-story elevator atrium that goes all the way up to the ceiling.
Wow.
It's very, very distinctive architecture.
But it's been vacant?
For the past 7 years or so, it has been. It's on the Skyway, so people can go through and see these distinctive architectural features. The one building, the Pioneer Building, was built in 1889 by a Chicago architect named Solon Beeman. But the Endicott on 4th and Robert, the connecting buildings, were by Cass Gilbert, one of our local architects, built in 1890. So they are gems of local architecture, and the idea that we'll have a gallery opening in there this fall and be able to be embedded in downtown St. Paul. It's directly on the future Central Corridor light rail line. It's right on the edge of Lower Town. It is in a vibrant community that is growing and is very excitingly growing into the future.
What else is going to be in that building then with you?
The developer is actually developing the upper stories for market rate apartments.
So it's in a renovation stage right now?
It's in a renovation stage. It's right in construction at the present time. And so the upper floors will be apartments.
And then the lower floors will be retail?
Yes, some retail. And we're investigating the idea of this being a potential permanent home for the museum. The gallery we're opening this fall is a way for us not only to start doing some programming on the ground in St. Paul, connecting with the communities, and bringing a museum gathering space and a visual arts gathering space back to downtown St. Paul, but also to begin to investigate this as our next home. And I'm very excited about it. There's many, many people who are also excited about it as well, including the city of St. Paul and other businesses on the Central Corridor light rail line. And artists, especially with our strong, strong artist community in Lowertown, are very eager to see what we can do with the space. So it was a way to get our foot back in St. Paul in a real dynamic way.
So you've talked about the legacy money as being important to helping you get the collection out. Who's been really helping you? I assume there's a board of directors. Who's been behind? What kind of supporters do you have for this kind of investment that you're going to be making?
Well, it's been a strong merger of both public and private funders. And it's really, the vision is capturing donors and patrons and supporters from a variety of different places. Individuals are coming back and showing great interest in what we're doing, so individual philanthropic support. We've recently, last year, started up our membership again, so you can become a member of the museum and support the growth of this organization, which is so important to St. Paul and for our community to connect through the visual arts. But many foundations connected not only with St. Paul, but broader, into the broader Twin Cities metro, have been very supportive of what we're doing and have come through with capacity building funds and operating support funds that are allowing us to grow our staff. I was one person 3 years ago as a staff member, and we're up to 4.5.
Wow, that's great.
In the past 3 years. So really building that has been important. But most recently we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal grant called the Our Town Grant, which is support for this new space and this new place and building a cultural hub for the visual arts in St. Paul. And so the endorsement of the federal government for what we're doing as important to St. Paul and important to this region is really been important for our momentum and our growth.
It's a challenging grant to get. That required some city support, did it not?
It did. We are in partnership with the City of St. Paul. And so it required that you had that sort of partnership going into it. But it was extremely competitive. We were the only organization in Minnesota to get the Our Town grant this year. And
someone got it last year, right?
Yes, a lot of the work they're doing along the Hennepin Avenue Cultural Corridor in Minneapolis. So this was time that it came back to St. Paul, although the National Endowment for the Arts and some of their other programs are doing a lot to help fund cultural initiatives in St. Paul. And so it's there's a lot of people looking at St. Paul as a very interesting new incubation space for ideas and for growth and for connecting in many variety of different creative ways with the city, with the people of the city, with the economic development. It's called creative placemaking, and there's been a lot of talk about that, and we're hoping to tie into that as we continue this new gallery.
Right, well, some of the research on creative placemaking has been at the Humphrey Institute, correct? I mean,
Absolutely.
the initial reports by Ann Markison and developed those reports, so that's something people can find. If they Google creative placemaking, they'll find the reports.
Absolutely.
And so you've been influenced by that work.
Absolutely, and it's really influencing a lot of the grant making coming from the national government right now, and many foundations, more local and statewide foundations, are starting to look at this as a model for not only the growth of the arts, but the growth of our communities and our cities.
Economic vitality.
And economic vitality, and it's all intertwined.
Let's talk a little bit about the opening of the space. You know, what's your timeline now for working on this new location?
Yes.
When can I'm sure you're going to have a party.
Yes, we are. Well, we'll be opening an exhibition in November. November 9th is our opening of an exhibition about painting in Minnesota. We're going to be featuring not only some local painters who take the Minnesota landscape as their inspiration.
Can you name a few of those?
Yes, Betsy Byers and Andrew Wykes are two of the artists that are part of that, and a film being created by an artist from Gustavus Adolphus, Chris Lowe, is going to be featured in that, about how artists interpret the landscape and use the landscape as inspiration for art that is about painting, is about putting paint on canvas. It's going to be a wonderful approach to how we look at painting through the eyes of artists and through the eyes of our landscape. We're also using this opportunity to bring out some art from our collection. And while the space in the Pioneer Building, which we are calling the project space, it's called a project space, is going to be primarily focused on intersecting with the community of living artists throughout our metro and state.
So are you having a series of events then, lectures, demonstrations? What's that going to look like?
Yes, yes. Well, a lot of it is going to be about bringing artists in to talk to people. I mean, artists are just like you and me, and they want to talk to people about their work, and I think people are inspired by meeting the artists and talking with them about their work. So we have those sorts of things planned. And we also have work from the collection that's going to be coming out in some of these exhibitions. We'll be having demonstrations. A more participatory environment will surround this space, and an experimental sort of environment. How can art really become part of experience and of engagement? And to that end, we've hired a curator. She's called a Curator of Engagement, and her name is Kristin Makholm, and she is charged with finding out how this new project space can really engage a variety of communities across the metro.
And what were Kristin's qualifications that brought you chose her for this particular role?
Yes, Kristina, well, she came to us from the Weissman Art Museum. She had been there for 2 years as an assistant curator. So she had been involved with the opening of the new edition at the Weissman Art Museum, and with getting some exhibitions up and running, connecting with the community, working with the art. So she was a perfect individual to come in, and she already had a good basis in the artist community and in the Twin Cities. And she's an art historian as well, like I am, and a curator. So it is about what stories you can tell through the art that can speak to people in new and intriguing ways.
So what kinds of stories have you heard from this kind of engagement? What kind of change do you see happening when people experience this?
Yes. Well, we've been able to do a few charrettes. We call them charrettes. It comes from the design community. Conversations with people, bringing in people and talking about not only, okay, here's a museum and here's what we can do for you, but what do you want? And I think that's really what people are hungering for, is the idea that they can have a stake in their museum, that their voice can be heard, that their opinions matter, that art isn't simply about what an artist exactly did when they created it or what a curator tells you about it, but that what you bring to it, your experience and your background and your ideas matter as well. And so that's what we've been hearing from people, is they want to be heard, and they want to have a stake in how their art museum grows and is founded and is developed. And those are the voices that we are listening to. And we've had a few of these charrettes already, one with artists and one with arts educators, because it will be important for us to connect with the St. Paul Public Schools, with the East Metro schools and beyond, in terms of connecting with our kids. Those are voices we have to hear. But we also hope in this next year to talk to more neighborhood people, to people who are living there, to people who come into St. Paul, to business people. We'll be speaking with the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce in a few months to hear how we may be able to intersect with the business community. And so it's all these voices that want to be heard and that we will be listening to.
Great. So if you, as you're having these conversations, do you have some goals for membership? How many members do you have now, and what are your goals for the next year or two?
Mm-hmm. We've, as I said, we basically started our membership again just last year. That we took a bit of a hiatus as we were regrowing, and we have over 200 members now. But we are continuing to grow this program. We have a new person in our development staff, a new marketing consultant who's helping us really intertwine those two things to bring people closer to what we can provide. And now with the new space opening, we'll be able to provide more opportunities for members to get involved and to play a role. So we're hoping to double that membership at least by next year, and there's a variety of different levels. we're trying to make it accessible and affordable for everyone. So our basic membership is $40, and our family membership is $60. And then we do have a special group called the American Art Forum, and that's $100 per person, which allows you to get a few additional perks, such as the ability to go into some artist studios, to go to private collections, to get a more in-depth view of American art, and particularly regional art and Minnesota art in our midst.
So what do you think makes American art or regional art special? What's the flavor of our creators here?
Well, we have an enormously creative environment around us in our midst. And I think that the history has been that you always look elsewhere. You see, oh, it's got to be over in Europe. I mean, the history of American art is that let's look at Europe for our tradition. And there were so many artists who, over the 20th century said, no, we can have our own indigenous art that's important. And yet that movement continues away from the epicenters of, one would say, New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, to really see that what we are creating in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities metropolitan area, there's a surfeit of talent. And we want this museum, and what we've heard is that people want to focus on us, on our talent.
That's fantastic. And so they can check it out on the website, which is Minnesota Museum of
MMAA.org.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for on the St. Paul Forum. Come back again next week.